So, here I am at Arby's paying seat rent and about ready to upload a video that I just shot of my subject. I apologize in advance if I seem to have been in a hurry or distracted. The fact is, I was shooting and several people were coming up to visit. Normally I do these in the mornings when this is not an issue, but I chose to do it tonight, or I should say after work. And it was just a whole lot of people coming and going, and my camera shut off twice. For no reason, so I had to reset my camera twice. If you happen to like this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe. If you ring that bell, you'll get notifications. Thank you. Behind me is the marker, or the memorial I should say, of General Thomas Sumter. General Thomas Sumter was a Revolutionary War hero, an officer. Matter of fact, I think he was the last officer to die. And he was a guerrilla fighter in the South Carolina area. Also, the movie The Patriot was loosely based on him and another guerrilla fighter here in South Carolina. But this movie ain't about, this video is not about him. It is, however, about his son, to a lesser degree, Thomas Sumter Jr., but more his daughter-in-law. And that's what this video is going to be about, his daughter-in-law. A very long time ago, in a land far away, a little girl was born. To be more specific, in France. In 1782, this little girl was born. Now, when a baby's born, a lot of times the parents will look down at the baby and the miracle that is life, and they'll have dreams for the baby. Well, this mother had no way of knowing that in 10 years, or less actually, that her family would be chased out of the country, that people would want to kill her and her whole family. You see, Natalie, the baby, was born into French royalty. Her people were noble. Her family tree was of noble birth. See, her mom was Marie Antoinette's bridesmaid. Her godfather was the King of France himself. During the French Revolution, see, their revolution was different than the American Revolution. The American Revolution was about getting freedom and then moving on, but the French Revolution, they wanted freedom and they wanted revenge. So they had what it was called a reign of terror, where they would chase down anybody that was from royalty, noble blood, or Catholic leaders. And they would chase them and with the intent to kill them. And a lot of people died. Thousands and thousands died in the French Revolution just out of pure revenge. So at 10 years old, around about, the reign of terror started. And this was, they had to leave the country. So what they did, they scattered. That Natalie and her nanny ended up going to New York City, where her nanny was hired to be the nanny for the daughter of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was the third vice president of the United States, and he was out of New York. So basically, Aaron Burr raised Natalie. Well, the nanny raised Natalie under Aaron Burr. She grew, she was educated, and then about 20 years old, it was safe to go back to France. So she got on a boat, heading back to France. On the same boat was a young, well, not a real young man. She was 20 and he was in his early 30s. He was he was going to France on a diplomatic mission. And she was just going to go reunite with family. Well, she fell in love. And despite the fact that he was not Thomas Catholic, because she was a very devout Catholic, and you see, Natalie's mom had an ideal of the perfect guy for Natalie to marry would be French. He would be of high social standing, from high class social circles, and he would be Catholic. Well, Thomas Sumter Jr. was none of that by any means. He wasn't Catholic, wasn't French, and even though he had high social standing around here, because his dad was a Revolutionary War hero and they had several plantations, it's not the same over in France. It does not equal the same. After some convincing, she said, okay, you can marry, and they got married. Well, they lived in France for several years, and I think I read that it was 12 years before she stepped foot in South Carolina and came back here to where this plantation was, which is not a plantation. As a matter of fact, Mr. Thomas Sumter had 300,000 acres scattered across South Carolina and some in Virginia. Now, this was not near that big. But this was where Thomas Sumter lived. This is where the Sumter family lived. This is where Natalie ended up with 12 years after her and Thomas Sumter Jr. got married. So it was about 12 years before she made it to South Carolina. And I would say she probably was not happy about it. She didn't like it very much. She made the best of it. And then Thomas Sumter Jr. became the ambassador of Brazil. So off to Brazil they went for several years. So, and then they went back to Paris, France for a few years also. A lot of traveling going back and forth. And without having my notes right in front of me, which I'm trying to avoid, I can't really get into details. But I do know this. They had several children. Some of them grew up, stayed in France. So there could very well possibly be a French Sumter family over there now. Others finished their growing up in Brazil and stayed there. So there may very well be a Sumter family that's been there for years and years and years in Brazil. So anyway, she was Catholic. And in this area, there were absolutely no Catholics whatsoever. She was the first Catholic. She went about teaching the slaves how to read and write. That was a big no-no back then, but she wanted them to know the Catholic faith and how to read the Bible. So she taught them how to read. They learned the Catholic faith. As a matter of fact, I would dare say that the first Catholics, more numbers than one, were slaves. And they ended up building a church here and then a church downtown later. But that's a different story. I'm not going to get into that right now. That'll be for another video. So Natalie had a life of adventure, of major disappointment, I'm sure, when she moved here. I mean, think about it. She was from a royal, privileged background. She got chased out of the country. Her family almost got killed off. Her dad was an admiral in the French Navy, and they were prime targets to be killed. That's why they had to leave. And then she marries a guy from the backwoods of South Carolina, which at that time, this was the backwoods. It was Charleston and then backwoods. And but she dealt with it the best she could. Now, I just read an excerpt from her diary. She died, by the way, in 1841 at the age of 59 years old, which is fairly young. I don't know what she died from. I haven't researched it hard to find out, even though I have tried to find it. But she did. She died in 1841 at 59 years old. And I happened to be privileged to read an excerpt. She kept a diary the last year of her life. And her husband died before her. And in the diary, she writes that she went about looking in her garden for a place to be buried. And in looking, she said, I'm just not happy with what I'm seeing. She said she didn't want to be buried in an enclosure. Now, I'm not sure what that meant, but she did say even death has a social standard. I'm not even sure what that means. Behind me, this is her crypt. This is her tomb. I've heard conflicting stories, but basically this was, I was told or read that this was where she had a chapel built to pray before they built a church. And then this ended up becoming where she was buried at. So I'm about to show you the inside. I'm not going to talk when I get up there because it does a terrible echo. So I'm walking up there, and you're going to see her name is a long name. It's really very plain. If it was a chapel, I'm sure it was decorated better. But something interesting is that up there. And I wonder if that might have been a stained glass window at the time, because when the sun comes up, it shines directly through that, if indeed that was a stained glass window. I don't know, it might have been a statue, but I'm sure something was there. That about wraps it up.